Good afternoon, members of the media, wider viewing and listening public of Trinidad and Tobago. Welcome to this week's post-cabinet media briefing. And we have addressing us today the Honourable Prime Minister, and I'll invite him immediately to the podium to address us. The Prime Minister, Dr. Rowley.
Thank you very much, members of the media. I am today wanting to address matters that occurred, or I should say a particular matter that visited us on the eve of Easter, and which we could not have comprehensively addressed during the Easter festivities. And today I'm in a position to respond to a lot of what was before us. Unfortunately, this is Trinidad and Tobago, and many persons who are in a position to interact with the media have no difficulty in jumping to positions without the requisite information. Even when they admit that they don't have the information, they would proceed beyond that point to make all kinds of statements and take positions which may be at variance with the facts. As head of the government, I do not have that luxury. I am required to be exercised by the facts, pleasant or unpleasant. Ladies and gentlemen, I refer specifically to the development with respect to the presentation of Trinidad and Tobago's position on Dominica's request for a waiver at the OAS meeting on the 23rd of March. Let me begin by saying that I, as Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, was as shocked and embarrassed as any other citizen of this republic of ours. And I'm responsible for how the government portrays the people of Trinidad and Tobago outside our borders. And by government, I mean all those on the taxpayers' payroll. Permit me a moment to back up to where we started. When I took over this government of Trinidad and Tobago, it fell to the Prime Minister to appoint cabinet ministers and designate the scope and range of their portfolios. I designated a portfolio, foreign and CARICOM affairs. I'm not aware that this had happened before, but I took the position to emphasize that in Trinidad and Tobago, under my stewardship, under this administration, there will be focus on CARICOM, separate and apart from, but in step with our external relations. I appointed a very experienced, while not flamboyant, person in the position. Senator Minister Moses has served in the OAS at various levels for approximately 19 years and has served at ICA and other international bodies where Trinidad and Tobago is represented for a considerable period of time. So in Trinidad and Tobago, we do have a Minister of Foreign Affairs who is very experienced and who quietly gets his job done. We were experiencing a very unusually rough hurricane season last year. And in the middle of the night, I was contacted by the CARICOM Secretariat out of Guyana, indicating that Dominica was being battered beyond recognition and would need significant help from Trinidad and Tobago. Our country's position was and remains that regardless of what our circumstances are at home, we will always be able to share what little we have with those of our brothers and sisters in CARICOM who may be in greater need from time to time. And it's against that background that during that particular and fateful night, that by morning, we were able to report that we had helicopter assistance available in Dominica for search and rescue, and that we had a loaded vessel sailing to Roseau. That was Trinidad and Tobago's initial response, and it continued until we could do no more useful intervention. By September 23rd, Trinidad and Tobago's position was being made known to the world by the presentation of the foreign minister at the United Nations annual meeting, where Minister Moses, representing the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, spoke. And permit me to quote for you what our position was to the world at the United Nations, specifically to our Caribbean hurricane experiences. And he said, Trinidad and Tobago, which is the southernmost part of the Caribbean, was spared from the ravages of these hurricanes. It is with empathy that I extend on behalf of the government and people of Trinidad and Tobago heartfelt condolences to our Caribbean family. We are forever mindful that given our spirit of resilience, we will rebuild that which was lost. Trinidad and Tobago stands in solidarity and shall continue to assist with the relief efforts. However, rebuilding will require resources as well as the cooperation and collaboration of the international community, because we simply cannot do it alone, among other things which were said there. So that was Trinidad and Tobago speaking at the United Nations. Subsequently, there was a donor conference, and we were represented there at the United Nations headquarters by our permanent representative, Ambassador Penelope Beckles. And permit me again to quote Trinidad and Tobago's position as represented by its representative, speaking for the people of Trinidad and Tobago, authorized by the government of Trinidad and Tobago. And Ambassador Beckles had this to say, and I quote. I quote selectively from her presentation. And she says, at the outset, on behalf of the government and people of Trinidad and Tobago, we continue to be deeply saddened by these events, and we will continue to stand in solidarity and support on the road to recovery and reconstruction. Together, we will all face the painful and irreparable loss of many lives and the widespread damage to homes and livelihoods. She went on to say, therefore, Trinidad and Tobago also takes this opportunity in joining with others in expressing our delegation's appreciation to the United Nations and the CARICOM Secretary General for organizing this timely and necessary high-level donor conference to assist those countries affected by the tragic aftermath of Hurricanes Irma and Maria. Chairman, and she continues to say, as a member of the international community and a CARICOM member state, the government of Trinidad and Tobago mobilized resources and assistance to our brothers and sisters in Antigua and Barbuda and Dominica in the aftermath of the hurricanes Irma and Maria. Our government provided a helicopter and crew to provide relief and aid for Barbuda, including air support for search and rescues and evacuation of the island. The Trinidad and Tobago Defense Force, in collaboration with our ODPM and partners, the Caribbean Disaster Emergency Management Agency, CDIMA, identified persons who needed assistance, the Rapid Needs Assessment Team, and an operational support team, and they went to work within the regional response mechanism and to support the conduct of initial damage assessments. In Trinidad and Tobago, a massive collective drive for relief items was promoted by the government in collaboration with the business sector and civil society. To date, speaking in November, a total of over 36 tons of relief supplies to our brothers and sisters in Dominica were on the way. 126 persons from Trinidad and Tobago Defense Force, Coast Guard, and Air Guard, as well as medical personnel, were dispatched from Trinidad and Tobago to support the recovery efforts in Dominica. Our permanent representative at the UN went on to say, Mr. Chairman, it is known that Trinidad and Tobago is currently faced with difficult economic challenges. Notwithstanding this, when called upon, the government, but more importantly, the people of Trinidad and Tobago, has come together and has willingly donated food, water, medical supplies, and building materials. When our Caribbean brothers and sisters need us, we unequivocally answer. Our ambassador went on to say, in closing, the government of Trinidad and Tobago takes this opportunity to reaffirm our commitment to our CARICOM neighbors and our fullest support and solidarity as we continue together on this path towards resilience for a better and stronger Caribbean. That was the position and the policy of the government of Trinidad and Tobago. So for those who take it upon themselves to exercise themselves in speaking about the government of Trinidad and Tobago not having a policy with respect to these matters, I draw their attention to these internationally established and elucidated positions of our minister at the UN and our permanent rep at the UN on Trinidad and Tobago specific to this issue. There was a meeting, wasn't known to me because these things don't all get to the Prime Minister's desk, but we have structures in government to deal with them. But let me remind you that in seeking assistance for Dominica, over and above what I mentioned here in the words of our ambassador and our minister, I went as far as to invite the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago to open their homes, and if they have Dominicans who they were in contact with, who they could support for a little while, to open their homes to Dominicans. And we took a decision at the level of the Minister of Education that our schools will be open to Dominican students if they make their way to Trinidad and Tobago. There were persons in Trinidad and Tobago who took objection to that and sought to make it a political issue. Persons in the opposition today who are trying to advise the government on what position it must take with Dominica. I simply want to remind you of what position this government took and the position that I took as Prime Minister and the people of Trinidad and Tobago, the wider populace. So it would be surprising to me, as it has been, that any person could claim not to know the level of empathy and commitment that the government of Trinidad and Tobago has made on behalf of the people of Trinidad and Tobago, specific to Dominica and its horrendous circumstances that they were coping with. Particularly office holders whose job it is to portray our country abroad, and those at home who support those who are abroad. It is surprising to me that there could be any person who didn't know what our position was. However, in the operations of the international business, there are structures and steps usually conducted in meetings, and there are lines of communication. And those lines of communications are clear and well established. So when I heard that Trinidad and Tobago had taken a position in opposition to the request of Dominica, it came as a shock to me, and I immediately inquired to find out how could this be and who was directing that policy, because clearly that was a change of policy that required an input from the political directorate. I asked for a comprehensive report from all levels where this matter would have been addressed, and a report from the minister who was responsible for this area of governmental activity. I have got those original documents from the various levels of our government, and it makes disturbing reading. Not for the first time, I have had to be concerned about certain actions taken by persons who may not have followed established procedures, or more, or worse, usurp the authority where that authority lies. The gist of what is before me in these documents, and let me just selectively, as I would, extract from some of the documents, some of the lines that are contained in there, so you can get a picture of what confronted me when I got this report. This item, report of Deputy Director, Americas Division in the Foreign Affairs Ministry. One line in there says, on Friday morning, I wrote in the relevant file to the Permanent Secretary indicating that it was the view of the Americas Division that the request for a waiver from Dominica should be supported. This was transmitted to the Permanent Secretary on file. This Friday morning is Friday the 23rd of March. Let me draw to your attention that there was a meeting on the 15th of March of the OS where preparations for this Friday meeting took place. This is normal in these kinds of meetings. There's usually a preparatory meeting where officials go to that meeting and the agenda is worked out and positions taken and so on. That prep meeting for the meeting of the 23rd took place on the 15th. It's called the CAP. And nobody knows that more than Minister Moses, because he spent so many years at the OAS. Our officers also know that. In seeking to get to the bottom of this, we're now discovering that Trinidad and Tobago was absent from that meeting, unbeknownst to our headquarters. Trinidad and Tobago was absent from that meeting on the 15th of March. At that meeting, a unanimous decision was taken by all members of the OAS that they will support the waiver of Dominica, as requested by Dominica, to pay their dues. So that decision was taken on the 15th. On the 22nd of March, our officials were seeking guidance from Trinidad and Tobago as to how to respond to Dominica's request for a waiver. An issue that came up on the 15th of March, where Trinidad and Tobago was absent from the meeting, and of course, I am advised by these documents that headquarters was not advised that a unanimous decision was taken at that meeting to support Dominica. That decision taken on the 15th by OAS is exactly in keeping with the position of Trinidad and Tobago at the UN through Minister Moses and at the donor conference through Representative Penny Beckles, as I read to you earlier on. So that was our position. That is our position. However, on the 22nd of March, and I have in the report a minute-by-minute arrangement of this, 22nd and 23rd, as to who did what and who said what. Directions were sought from headquarters, and public officials started communicating Port of Spain and Washington. One of the concerns of the officials who were communicating was that if a waiver was granted to Dominica, the cost of Dominica's fees could have fallen onto Trinidad and Tobago, being another one of the CARICOM countries, an OAS member. It was determined at the meeting of the 15th that that will not be so. So there was no cost to us, even if Dominica was granted the waiver. So whether we agree or didn't agree, it wouldn't cost us anything. It was simply a procedural arrangement that Dominica would be allowed apply for 2 years, 2018 and 2019, in making their financial contribution to the OAS. And that position was cleared on the 15th of March to be taken to the vote, to establish it by vote on the 23rd of March. On the 22nd of March, guidance was being sought in Trinidad, and of course, the officers there. So, part of my report, an actual statement coming from Washington, officials at Washington, given the explanations provided by our distinguished chair of the CAP, in the circumstances, the chair and distinguished colleagues, Trinidad and Tobago would wish to offer its express reservation, again here. So, somewhere, Trinidad and Tobago is now offering a reservation to that. How did that happen? Another one of my reports. This is from the Acting Deputy Permanent Secretary, saying, and he says, his position was that Trinidad and Tobago's position should remain consistent with those expressed at several meetings of CARICOM and the ACS with respect to the grant of waivers by him. This is the source of the problem. Public officials are now deciding that notwithstanding what the political directorate may come to, the advice to, and the position of Trinidad and Tobago, is that we should maintain some consistency with some prior position somewhere else on some other matter. And to maintain that consistency, we must say no to the Dominica waiver. What they were referring to was an earlier meeting in February, I think, where there was a request by another CARICOM country for a waiver within CARICOM on a matter. And the CARICOM group took the position, including Trinidad and Tobago, that that waiver to that particular request should not be granted. Officials are now saying, in the Dominica situation, we should use that position and be consistent and say no to any and all waivers. And I may quote another line. It says, I am advised that on the 15th of March 2018, a meeting of the Committee of the Administrative and Budgetary Affairs of the OAS was convened to discuss inter alia the request from the Commonwealth of Dominica for a waiver of its financial contributions. At this meeting, it was agreed that all members would vote in favor of the waiver of the contributions to the OAS of 2018 and 2019. So persons in attendance of Trinidad and Tobago's business would have been eventually aware before Friday 23rd, 5 o'clock, that there was a position on the 15th of March at the OAS where all members agreed that a vote would be cast in favor of acceding to Dominica's request. Another one of my reports coming from the Permanent Secretary, because these officers were reporting to the Permanent Secretary and reporting back to Washington. The Permanent Secretary's report, having reviewed the above, which is the meeting schedules and so on, I indicated, agreed, this is the Permanent Secretary agreeing that the policy of Trinidad and Tobago should be changed to should be consistent with something they did before over a request that was quite separate and apart. But we must change our position where Dominica waiver would now we would reserve a support for that waiver. Agreed. And the Permanent Secretary goes on, and I'm quoting the Permanent Secretary in own report. However, I failed to forward the matter to the Minister, as is the standard procedure, and as I am accustomed to on matters in respect of which an official position of Trinidad and Tobago is required. And of course, in the Permanent Secretary's report, Permanent Secretary acknowledges, on looking at the matter, including the meeting that was missed by Trinidad and Tobago on the 15th, it was therefore clear that there was consensus among the membership present at the reference meeting of the CAP to accede to Dominica's request for a waiver of its contributions to the OAS. This other report gives you the minute-by-minute arrangement of who said what, who did what, when, between headquarters and Washington. And this is the report of the minister himself to the Prime Minister. And I quote for you the minister's position because I wanted every officer, including the minister, to give me his or her position from their various locations. And it reads, within the Ministry of Foreign and CARICOM Affairs, there's an entrenched standard procedure to process requests from heads of mission of Trinidad and Tobago on the position to be adopted in international fora. On receipt, such requests are sent to the relevant division of the ministry for attention. The resulting output is ultimately sent to the Permanent Secretary, who submits it to the Minister of Foreign Affairs for consideration and authorization. Once the Foreign Minister approves the position, it is sent back to the Permanent Secretary for onward transmission to the mission concerned. In the case of the request by Trinidad and Tobago's Embassy, Washington, for guidance relative to the consideration by the Permanent Council of the OAS at its sitting on 23rd March 2018, it was processed by two divisions within the ministry. Consultations and a cooperative effort involving personnel from the Embassy, Washington, and the ministry resulted in a changed position from a recommendation from the Embassy, Washington, to support Dominica's request to another position, to one being proposed by the Permanent Secretary of the Ministry via the Acting Deputy Permanent Secretary. I was never consulted, nor was any submission made to me on this matter. I was not even aware that a request from Dominica for a waiver was to be considered by the Permanent Council, by the OAS on 23-2018. It is instructive that I was physically present in the ministry and had extensive discussions with the Permanent Secretary during the same period of 23rd March 2018 that the unauthorized position of Trinidad and Tobago was conveyed to the Embassy, Washington. Those are the facts. Those are the reports from the various locations in our station. And I have today taken the decision to send all of these reports and this situation for expert review by Ambassador Christopher Thomas, who is a very experienced Foreign Service officer who has represented Trinidad and Tobago as an accomplished diplomat at the highest level. He's had a long and distinguished career where he served as Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs from 1983 to 1985. He was Trinidad and Tobago's ambassador to Venezuela from 1985 to 1990 and was then elected as Assistant Secretary General to the OAS for 2 consecutive terms from 1990 to 2000. He was also an independent senator from 2001 to 2003, and he chaired a service commission, and he has also been an observer on election missions. Highly qualified national who I rely on to give me a more appropriate analysis of what we're dealing with here, because it is my intention to let the facts dictate what actions are taken as Prime Minister on this matter. The second matter I want to touch on is the matter of Cambridge Analytica, where Trinidad and Tobago has been used as a basis for extending apparent criminal conduct around the world. There's evidence being collected outside of our jurisdiction that persons in Trinidad and Tobago and persons in the political arena and possibly in the government of Trinidad and Tobago worked with foreigners and entities based outside of Trinidad and Tobago to access information, private, personal, and protected by law, of citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, invading their privacy in such a way that for persons who fell under that operation, all of their interaction with the internet, embarrassing or otherwise, but always personal, became raw material for the conduct of an election campaign in Trinidad and Tobago. It is our view that if that is confirmed, as witnesses are confirming abroad, then we in Trinidad and Tobago need to pay attention as to what laws, if any, were broken in Trinidad and Tobago, and who did what, where, when, and how, and to what extent taxpayer resources were used in this shenanigan. All I could say at this stage is that for those of us who were involved in election campaigns and elections, and those who were candidates or responsible for political entities and so on, have a window to this issue now, which is frightening. I recall, as opposition leader, coming under tremendous personal attacks, which only came clearer to me as the infractions and criminal conduct of Cambridge Analytica became available on international television, and their role in Trinidad and Tobago became admitted. The Attorney General spoke on this matter briefly. I can confirm that we are in touch with external entities under the Mutual Legal Assistance Treaties. And I have spoken today to the leader of government business in the House, and it is the intention of the government to bring this matter for parliamentary debate and ventilation at the earliest opportunity. I'm advised today by my colleagues who hold certain responsibilities that this matter will also form the basis of a thorough investigation by the Joint Select Committee of the Parliament, chaired by Minister Fitzgerald Hines, National Security Joint Select Committee, where persons, both local and foreign, can and will be summoned to explain their involvement in this scandal.